Hello and welcome to this week's Roundup by blockchaingamer.biz, your source of the most relevant news in blockchain gaming. If you haven't already, make sure you check out our stories on our website, blockchaingamer.biz, and follow us on Twitter at BCGBiz. Today is Friday, 12th of May, and I'm your host, Jenny Jordan, and with me is co-host John Jordan. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
How are you? Yeah, I'm good. It's sunny today, so it's nice. Friday. What else do you need? So we're going to start this week's roundup with some sad news from the US developer Irreverent Labs has announced that the development of its blockchain strategy game MechaFightClub has been paused for the unforeseeable future. The studio claims that it's due to a lack of clarity in US regulations surrounding crypto and blockchain, and that it made it impossible for them to build a sustainable in-game economy due to these conditions. Irreverent Labs had raised 45 million in total for the game, and 15 of those only last year. So it's some healthy resources, really. And good news for the holders of their MechaFightClub NFTs is that the company is offering a good buyback program called Sol for Cox, where the NFT holders who send their NFTs to a burn address will receive 18 Sol in return. So this will cost Irreverent Labs around $2.5 million, I think. What can you tell us about this, John? Anything else?
Yeah, sort of interesting, sort of just breaking news. So there's a little bit to unpick. So while I wouldn't say that Irreverent Labs' reason for pausing development is made up, I think clearly over the last couple of years there is now this big uncertainty for US companies around sort of regulation, and that's clearly sort of directly or indirectly sort of part of the Biden administration. There's sort of lots of sort of prominent Democrats who for whatever reason really don't like crypto. So it's sort of I guess it tends to be more on the progressive wing there. They don't like it for some reason, and that's filtered through into the SEC, which is the main sort of regulatory body in the US for financial assets. So the Securities and Exchange Commission. So generally, anything that's like a company stock would be classified as a security. And there's all laws around who you can sell those things to, and it's actually I won't go into all that, but to some degree we could look at it from a blockchain point of view as being very centralized in the sense that supposedly for consumer protection you're only allowed to sell sort of these assets to sort of sophisticated individuals. There's sort of specific things that you have to sort of pass these various sort of rules to be basically you don't have to be a rich person to invest in these sort of things, which obviously for a lot of people would think that's the rich keeping themselves rich. But anyway,
absolutely.
So the SEC over the last 2 years with Gary Geisler, who's a sort of ex-economist who at one point was shilling things like Algorand and went on record as saying Ethereum wasn't a security, has now suddenly decided that everything's a security, and thus the SEC should be regulating everything. So it's sort of part of the thing regulators do. Regulators sort of decide that they should have lots of power and be telling everyone off. So I think broadly that is clearly correct, that we have seen a lot of uncertainty about exactly what security is, and we've seen the SEC going after people like CoinDesk, and CoinDesk then not suing the SEC for not being clear about this sort of stuff. Whether that would have impacted Irreverent Labs, it's sort of harder to judge. We've not seen the SEC go after any games companies. They've gone after Yuga Labs, the Bored Ape people, although that's still sort of ongoing. But generally, those big companies, I mean, certainly Coinbase and Yuga Labs, they can afford the best lawyers in the world, and so you could argue in a way it's a bit weird for the SEC to go after them because they know more about crypto than the SEC does. So we'll see what happens.
Well, and they've been inviting it, haven't they? They have said that they actually want regulations, so that would be good for the industry.
Yes, Coinbase has, So there's a whole bunch of stuff going on there at a very high level. When there's been stuff with Ripple. Ripple supposedly said they ended up paying $200 million to lawyers over the last 5 years to, sort this stuff out. Anyway, so that's in the background. So quite whether, my personal view, easy for me to say, isn't it? Not running a crypto company in the US, is that you have to decide your risk tolerance to this sort of stuff. And definitely the risk tolerance has gone up, over the last 2 years. Would Irreverent Labs be on the list for the SEC to go after? I mean, possibly. They've raised $45 million, so they're not like a little indie startup. And that's really for them to decide. And of their investors include A16Z, one of the biggest crypto investor, who also have a whole bunch of lawyers who are also moaning about the SEC. So it may have been that Irreverent Labs have some advice from A16Z about this sort of stuff. I'd be amazed if they didn't. But equally, I don't see any other A16Z funded companies saying we're pulling out of blockchain, which is sort of what Irreverent Labs has said. So they've sort of said, under current conditions, our plans for MechaFightClub can't be fulfilled. We can't do what we want to do because we're worried about regulatory issues. And so the only sensible thing for us to do is basically they've said we are indefinitely pausing that project. So it may be that intellectual property may come back in a different way in a non-blockchain game.
Well, exactly. They're pausing sort of the blockchain aspect of it, but they want to continue with the idea of the game.
No, not really. What they've sort of said is they one of the things they wanted to do with MechaFightClub, because it wasn't really clear what the game actually was going to be. So they talked roughly about, you have these they are these mecha sort of robot chickens, basically.
They're good. I like them.
Yeah, and they were called Irreverent Labs because it was all supposed to be sort of quite humorous and funny, and these robot sort of chickens in the future they were going to be fighting and all this sort of stuff. You can imagine if you had a PvP combat game, and you can imagine they're having sort of other NFTs around that, and you can have these, what they're calling them, the I can't remember the terms, but the rings. They didn't call them the rings where you do the fighting stuff. So a whole bunch of stuff in there. And they said they've been building a whole bunch of creator tools to sort of underpin what the IP was going to be. And so sort of what they've said now is they're not doing the game anymore. They're leaving that and they're focusing on the tools.
Oh, yeah.
So whether that means they're becoming a tools company for making things that other developers may use, or whether they'll use those tools themselves in another game, we don't know yet. But that's basically what they said. They're focusing on the tools. They're becoming a tools-focused company. There's no detail on that, really. And we'll see how that sort of goes. And I should sort of point out that although the founder of Irreverent Labs, is a serial entrepreneur. So he started off in Canada making custom PCs for games companies. I think got bought out by Dell, I think, way back in the day. And then he was involved with another crypto project back in the day called Unicorn. It was a gambling product that also actually did get caught up by the SEC back in the early days. So he has personally gone through that project sort of problems. So maybe he's a bit more aware of that, a bit more sensitive to it. But they weren't a games company. They weren't like a bunch of guys who made a whole, making games for 20 years, like a lot of other blockchain game companies are. So sort of they were more on the entertainment side than the sort of traditional game side. So that I think plays into it as well. The good news, I suppose, which is the thing that most people don't care. Most people don't care about this sort of story at all. But the good news for people who are holding the MechaFightClub NFTs that were launched on Solana, I think over a year ago. I can't quite remember, but I think it was at that sort of time. And they've done this buyback program, as you mentioned. So obviously, when the thing was minted, the sold price was much higher. I tried to do some research, but the MechaFightClub, as far as I think, the NFTs have sort of been removed from marketplaces now, so it's hard to get the data. So I don't know that much data, but they definitely didn't mint for 18 Sol, but Sol then was $200, and now it's $20. So as far as I can tell, so the peak price sort of at the sort of end of last year, or sort of the fall of last year, was about 10 Sol, I think, for the floor of the NFTs. But then Sol was sort of about $40. So you're getting 18. You're getting 18 Sol. If you basically let them buy back your NFT at $20, so it's about $400, $360 you're getting. So some people, will have made money on that. Some people will have lost money, but I think it's a fairly, Irreverent Labs don't need to do that at all. That's sort of something that they've sort of chosen to do. And as you say, if all the NFTs got sent back, that would be $2.5 million of revenue that they could have spent on something else. So I think that I think that is a positive thing to do. I think that is a sort of a best practice thing to do. And they're not the first developer to do that, but they are the first sort of big developer to do that.
Yeah.
And so if you do have one of the MechaBot NFTs, you have to read through sort of what they've said on their website. So you do have to send it back yourself. They basically, it's on the 15th of May, so that's next Monday. They'll give you a burn address, so basically a Solana address. You have to pay the gas fee and send that NFT to that address, and then over the next, I think they said over the next 10 days they'll start doing refunds.
So it's unlikely that the kind of the only difficulty would have been regarding the kind of building the in-game economy. Otherwise, we would have seen kind of more games cancelling or announcing similar sort of issues. But maybe could it be that the other games will now sort of follow suit, and it could be that they, that.
Yeah, I mean that's why reading between the lines is I think it's a bit like when sort of COVID happened. Then obviously COVID was a big event in the world economy, but then lots of other companies would sort of, if something went wrong, they sort of blamed COVID, which may have been the case or may have been some underlying issues. So I think there's a bit of that going on there. I think it was a project that, from the outside looking in, I had spoken to the CEO on my podcast, last year, and I wasn't terribly sure exactly sort of what they were doing with it, or that it was enormously compelling. And obviously, Solana's gone through a bit of a difficult time, recently as well. So, they didn't really, I don't know if they were going to have a token, but at the moment they just had NFTs, and they could have, I think they were not the project that I would expected to have a very deep sort of blockchain economy where you had loads of tokens and staking and sort of those sort of things. As soon as you have tokens and staking and that sort of stuff, then that's when security stuff kicks in. I think if you're selling NFTs, that's much harder for the SEC will have a much harder case to deal with NFTs, because obviously there's bits of art and obviously financial assets around that. But as soon as you have tokens, then I think people start to get there's a bit more. You're opening up your sort of attack vectors a bit more there. But even then, I think if this would be the case, then literally every blockchain game in America would be shutting down as well. So I think we, as you say, it will be interesting to see whether we will see some more. And I guess it would be, the likes of the stuff that A16Z has invested, billions of dollars in, because they have the best lawyers, and if they think there's a systemic problem that's coming, then we'll start to see more of that happening from those sort of projects. But my gut feeling is this was a bit more specific to the MechaFightClub project, and it is interesting now as a lot of funding went into the industry over the last year or so, and those projects are now coming into they've been worked on, they've been developed, and now they are getting lots of alphas, lots of open betas, closed betas, whatever the exact thing is. But there's lots of projects now that are now releasing stuff, and maybe they're games without blockchain in at the moment. And clearly some of those projects just won't have worked out how the developer thought they would, and some of the projects just won't find what technically we call product market fit, which basically just sounds like it basically means does anyone like it? There's a lot of games coming out. You can make a developer can make a game they think is the best game ever, and players just go don't like it, So there's all those different reasons why things might not work out. So.
Well, we'll be following it with excitement. I mean, it's kind of a natural progression for some projects, and maybe this is a step that more projects actually should take. They should realize and that they need to narrow down, focus on what they're doing good, as in like developing tools maybe, or what it might be, rather than try and do a little bit of everything and have a little bit of blockchain here and there and not actually being very intentional about it.
Yes, no, I absolutely agree, and I think that's the sort of takeaway. Decide all the sort of rumor that I've been throwing about their intentions, sort of thing. I do think the you don't see very much of it in the game space, and so when you do see it, it does stand out where companies that are structured and make an early decision that things are not going as they hoped, and Irreverent Labs presumably could have spent years. They raised enough money; they could have spent the next 5 years just still plodding along and look at, aren't we great and blah blah blah. But obviously they've looked at the market and looked at the product and said, no, we're going to focus on something else. So it's sort of like a traditional pivot that you would have in business. And I think a lot of blockchain games really, most of them are going to have to deal with that because they haven't got funding to sort of complete what they wanted. But particularly, a lot of games, say half the cost of a game development is in the actual making the game and paying people's salaries and stuff. But then when you get to launch, you have to spend marketing, and marketing is a big cost. It may be a third to a half of sort of the overall budget of a project, maybe marketing. And that's definitely the sort of time where, one, people maybe can't raise the money, or two, they sort of realise they get the early metrics back for people playing it and the monetization stuff, and then they just realise, we could spend $1 billion marketing this game and we're never, it's never going to be profitable. So making those hard decisions is sort of important, and obviously then that gives you the freedom to look around and see how the market's changed, and obviously gives you the freedom to, learn from your sort of failures. And I mean, and this sounds very much like a cliche. Like everyone says, you learn the most from your failures, but clearly you do. And I guess examples of companies the famous one in games is Supercell. So Supercell, obviously super well known in mobile gaming, and basically its first game was a Facebook shooter game called Gunshine, which was they launched it on Facebook. It was absolutely total flop, and they were like, what can we do now? And they sort of said, mobile seems to be a thing. Let's try a mobile game, and sort of, as they say, the rest is history. But so hopefully I still sort of positive about Irreverent Labs. I think they're a smart group of people with still probably $20 million in the bank. So I'm sure they'll come up with something.
Yeah, it leads us nicely into talking about some of the launches that's been coming this week. We've seen Gala Games, Wild West Battle Royale Grit launching. And we have seen perhaps the more exciting one, Blocklords, launching its community beta that is available to download on PC until the 10th of June. So if you want a chance of playing that, you should go and download that now. Seeing the Singaporean metaverse developers Affin has announced a new Web3 mobile game, Buddy Arena, which is part of their sort of geolocation Nexus World metaverse project. They've also announced a partnership with the Sandbox and a couple of other partnerships announced. But what games have you been playing this week, John? I wonder.
Yes. Well, we should, before we get into that, we should say we are still enjoying NFL Rivals, aren't we? We've had lots of fun with that.
Yeah,
you're a really big fan. Yeah. So we're enjoying that one, even though we don't know anything about American football. And I've been messing around working out how the NFTs fit within the game. So it's a mobile game.
I need to upgrade some of my players. They're really giving me an itch.
Exactly. We're gonna do some more NFT stuff around that. So NFL Rivals on the app stores.
And I'm playing Hunters
on Chain, of course.
Another one.
So they've announced that their mainnet version is going live at the end of May for Genesis NFT holders. But the main thing this week, as you mentioned, is Blocklords. So I've been really impressed by this by Blocklords, and maybe that's because I have a sort of lower sort of a quality threshold because all these other blockchain games are maybe not so good. But actually, Blocklords has been around for a long time. So 2019, I first came across it, and they were a game on Ethereum. Then they sort of did a demo version that was sort of underwhelming. And I think, as I mentioned in the past, I actually have one of the original NFTs on Ethereum somewhere in one of my old wallets, which anyway. But they sort of rebooted themselves. Originally, they were going to be a 2D medieval strategy game. Then they decided they were going to be a 3D medieval strategy game. They're from a developer who knows what they're doing, who's made a lot of mobile games. So going back to sort of Irreverent Labs, they're not like them. They are
MetaKing Studios.
Well, yeah, that's a new name, but the team behind them have done a lot of mobile games. And so they've been in blockchain for a while as well, done various different things. But they sort of raised $15 million for Blocklords last year to sort of get this version up and running. And as you say, this is a community beta, so it's I mean, a beta means that it's should be fairly advanced. There'll obviously be bugs in it, but there's not a lot of extra sort of features to add really. So it's a PC game, so you have to download it from the Blocklords website. It's not available on any launchers or anything yet. So and there's sort of not any blockchain in it. There is a little bit, but so what Blocklords has, because it's been around for a while, has made a few sort of decisions that maybe it regrets now. But it originally launched its first sort of character NFTs on Immutable X, and they are still live on Immutable X. There's a whole bunch of these NFTs on Immutable X, and then more recently they decided they're going on Polygon. So they've started doing ones on Polygon as well. So you can sort of import your NFTs from Polygon and Immutable into the game. That process actually was fairly straightforward. So but they're not really that useful. They sort of act as like sort of multipliers, so you can sort of boost some of your in-game activities using these things.
And do you need those NFTs to play the game?
You don't need those NFTs to play the game. So you basically just get a double. You sort of get a double efficiency on the workers that you attach your heroes to. So it's actually sort of quite minor. So you definitely don't need it. And I say this is the community beta, so there's a whole bunch of stuff in there that isn't. There's a whole bunch of features that are sort of, you can see them, they're sort of locked off. So it's sort of it's not the sort of fully fledged thing, and they're mainly testing just sort of the basic gameplay. You start off with nothing but a bit of land, and you have your first get your first workers, and they cut down some trees, and then you can build a I don't know what the main house is called, the main house, and then you build sort of a farm, and then you plant wheat, and then you build a windmill, and then you grind the wheat to make bread, and then you get some cows, and so it sort of builds up like very traditional sort of strategy city building game would be.
How would it compare to similar games in that genre that aren't blockchain games?
Yeah. I mean, that's probably why people might. I think people who are really into sort of sim type games like Civilization, stuff like that, sort of Civ games. This is nothing like that level. I mean, those games are incredibly detailed and have been going for Civilization is a brand that's been going for 30 years. Mm-hmm. So clearly it's not at that level. Nor those games are quite. You could argue those games are sort of quite hard to get your head around as a normal person. if we're normal people, I don't know. So I guess the point of this would be to have a really solid core base, and then have some interesting blockchain stuff around that. And sort of one of the, it sort of touches the community beta sort of touches upon this, where you basically have your individual land that you build up, but then the sort of region that you're in has an overall sort of lord. And they do stuff like they set the tax, the main thing they do, I think, is they set the tax rates. And so obviously, that's quite a powerful position to be. You have to own a certain NFT to be able to do that, and then you can sort of take a tax on all the people who are on your land. But obviously, if the tax is too high, everyone's going to move to someone else's land. It's very much like the island setting its rates compared to, I don't know, Singapore or something, and everyone. Google moving its international headquarters to somewhere else. So some interesting stuff going on there. And you can just sort of see, I'm not got that far into the game yet, I've only been playing for a day, but you can sort of see anything about economies and resources. Blockchain sort of plays into that. It's not to say that all the resources in the game will be blockchain assets, but you can sort of see there is a marketplace where you can sell your wood for gold and buy wood with gold and all that. You can imagine at some point that being a more sort of blockchain-y like sort of DEX, a bit like Uniswap for some of these assets. So, and I just kind of think it actually, it's a nice 3D game. I wouldn't say the graphics sort of blow your socks off, but it's sort of really, really, I think, well done. And maybe I was a bit, I don't know, I was just sort of surprised about how sort of much I liked it. So it got 27 days to go. One reason if you are interested to get in sooner rather than later is it's not really a battle pass, but there's sort of like a battle pass system in there. And if you complete that, they're giving out like an NFT for the main game, so like a militia unit. So from what I've seen, you're going to have to work pretty hard to get that. It's quite a lot of grinding. But yeah, I just kind of thought it was in the midst of I think in the midst of, we're starting to see some of these blockchain games come out. which is good. I mean, this was one that I was just thought if people just downloaded this and played it, they would just go, oh, this is quite nice, whether they knew it had blockchain in or not. So
that game is also our game of the week, which you can go on our website and read more about. I also meant to ask about NFL Rivals, actually, and the blockchain aspect of that. We talked about that the other week, and it's kind of becoming a little bit more clear to you, I think, or slightly. What are the blockchain aspects of that and how the marketplace has worked and so on?
I would say it's still not entirely clear to me, but in the app there you can sort of connect your mythical marketplace account. So basically what it's doing is if you go into mythical marketplace and buy some of these NFL players as NFTs, they're not particularly expensive. The cheapest ones are like $2 or something. Then if you connected your account in the app in the mobile game, then sort of immediately you buy something in the marketplace, it turns up in your game, and then you can use it. You can use that character in your game. So as it currently is in the app, you can't buy individual players. So you can't go. I don't know American football players, but I don't know. You can't go. Who's even one that I know? You can't. For a terrible analogy, there's a very famous quarterback called Joe Montana from the 80s. He was the most famous. So obviously he's not in the game now because it's a current game. But say you wanted to go and buy Joe Montana, you can't do that in NFL Rivals. But you could sort of get him in a loot box by paying either money or in-game currency, and he could just be a random drop in there. But if I really wanted Joe Montana, I could go to the marketplace and find exactly Joe Montana and see what the cheapest one is, and if I really wanted that, I could buy that, and then I'd get him in the game. So that's sort of the differentiated loop in there. Now, supposedly under Apple's laws, you can sell NFTs in apps, but it has to be the same process as you're doing it if you're doing it somewhere else. So that's a bit I don't really understand. At the moment, you can't do that. There's no NFT stuff you can access within the app. Now that could be because NFL Rivals says it's on is it the off season they call it?
Yeah.
So the mode is called off season. So it may be that they're sort of just doing this as a sort of entry level, and then they'll sort of bring more of that NFT stuff in the game. Because that's from talking to Mythical, that's what I thought they were doing. They were allowing people to sort of buy NFTs in the game, give Apple their 30%, and have that parity between the marketplace and the app. But that's not the case at the moment. But if you do, I think people are trading NFTs, because I've bought some by mistake on the marketplace, and then I bought doubles by mistake, and you can't have the same player twice in the team. Rookie mistake there. So I've had to sell some that I've bought, and they sell. I mean, I've priced them to sell, and they've sold quite quickly. So there are people sort of looking at the prices of stuff. Yeah. And there is this other whole thing. There's we're going to enormous detail. There's these other helmets, which are club helmets. Sort of, they appear like PFPs of all the teams, and it's not quite clear what they do in the game. I think they give you some sort of access to certain areas, but that's the one thing. That's the next thing I probably need to look at to see if you buy these sort of NFT helmets, which aren't players. They're just sort of like sort of badges almost. What do they give you in the game? Because they're quite expensive. They're like the cheapest one's $150 or something. So presumably they must have some give you something in the game. But then that sort of stuff again would go against Apple's rules that you're buying something external to the app.
I think the helmets were going to be relevant sort of in the next season, or
it might be
later on in the game, aren't they?
Yeah.
Okay. So we thank you very much for listening to us this week. That'll be the end of it, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
All right.